I thought I'd do something just, and don't let me forget the Hollywood Squares people up here. I thought I'd do a little bit different. I'll pick up on what you were talking about civility and what's happened in politics in this country and across the river in the last couple of years. And then I'll take the questions, because that's really the meat of why I come here, to hear from everyone and to try to answer and respond to those questions. It has bothered me a great deal in the last year or so about what's happened to politics in Canada. And I thought after COVID, when we emerged from it, I thought it'd be like what it was probably like after the Second World War, where there were victory parades and everyone said, let's get on with our lives. Instead, what has happened, dealing on a daily basis with anger about those lost years. But you think about, I know my parents living in Belfast, hiding from the German bombers. They gave up 4 or 5, as young people, very young people. And then they got on with their lives. We're not getting that. There's the politics of anger out there right now. And sometimes you can't even get to what is the anger about. Like, you can't. And Alan and I were talking a few weeks ago about some issues we've been dealing with locally. And it's very wasted energy. And I made some comments after some issues at City Hall that went national about the need to restore civility. And this author sent me her book and has been in contact. It's called Save Our City. And it's about the toxic atmosphere that's out there, and really suggesting if you want to turn that attitude around, the best place to start is at the grassroots level, at the local level, and then try to influence other governments. But, Steve, you're talking about some of the people we've lost. And I had the privilege of working in Ottawa from 1980 till 1985, when Mulroney defeated Turner, and then obviously we were out of office. But I never forgot the times. And I worked for Bud Cullen, the MP, who was a former Minister of Immigration, Minister of Revenue in the first Trudeau government. But the civility and again, this has been really bothering me over the last number of years, and I do talk to a lot of former recovering politicians who were part of that era. And, you were friends. Now there's 3, 4, or 5 tribes at Queen's Park, and they don't speak to each other. And I will give Mr. Mulroney, although I had some issues over the years, a lot of credit. He knew every member of his caucus, his kids, the wife, the husband. He nurtured that relationship, and he was very, very good at that. Even when they were in really bad shape politically, there was no anger in the caucus towards him. They respected and trusted him. And a couple of examples. Bud was really good friends with John Diefenbaker. And Diefenbaker had stayed on after Clark had beat him, right? And Bud and Joe Clark were French class together and talking all the time. Clark finally said to Bud one day, he says, you get along better with John Diefenbaker than I do. And I've seen so many examples of that. And you mentioned Andy Brandt, who became a good friend. I ran 2 elections against Andy for the provincial Liberals, one in 81 on behalf of Paul Blundy, who was the former mayor, and they had squared off a few times. Paul won once, Andy won, and then in the end, Andy won again. And I also ran Joan Link's campaign, I think it was 87 or 88. So Andy, we got along great. We were great on the platform together. We enjoyed each other. And I told this story at his funeral service that after those 2 elections, every year I'd get a Christmas card from Andy and Pat, his wife. And in the card, it would always say the same thing, because he always called me Michael. Michael, I want to thank you. You have done more for my career than anyone else in Sarnia. And that's the way, I had dinner with him 2 weeks before he died. And that's the way it should be, right? And I was very, very fortunate. I supported Jean Chrétien in the 84 election as a delegate and as a candidate. And yet John Turner forgave all that when he became the Prime Minister. So we developed a good relationship. And we had a mutual friend who actually was from Sarnia. But I was privileged in June of 2019 to be one of 160 Canadians to be invited to Ottawa for John Turner's 90th birthday. It was the only time ever, and probably will never happen again because of the loss of prime ministers, that all the prime ministers of Canada came together. Justin was there to speak. Every other prime minister was there. And I was stunned when Jean Chrétien came in, because when he spoke, him and Mr. Turner, since the early 60s, had been rivals. both young lawyers from Quebec, both became parliamentary secretaries, both became cabinet ministers, both became leaders. But he got up there and said, you know, we could have been much better friends in a different world, but he was there to pay tribute to him. And my favorite line, even when I came back from that one, was Mulroney had to come in by Zoom. And if you recall the infamous 84 election, we were doing really well till we got into the patronage issue, and Mulroney said, when John Turner said, I had no option. And Mulroney said, sorry, you had an option, you could have done this and all that stuff, right? And it was a knockout. Normally, leadership debates aren't knockouts. That was a knockout. So anyhow, Mulroney came on to this tribute to Mr. Turner, and he said, John, I'm apologizing. I know everyone else is there in person. I wanted to be there tonight. I wanted to be here with you, because they were friends, even though they were rivals, and Mulroney beat him in 2 elections. He said, I wanted to be there, but Mila made a commitment. And John, I had to go. I had no option. That's the way politics should be, right? You fight the good fight. And again, just to close on this point, is that there were relationships. And so the relationships I've had with different people, different political persuasions, that doesn't exist anymore. It's winner take all, and it's very angry, and it doesn't serve the country. And unfortunately, it's not getting better. So I'm picking around right now how I can bring that author in, find the money to do it, to at least have something at the local level to talk about civility and decency and respect. And I don't have any difficulty. In the last election, I tried to encourage a couple of candidates to run, very solid candidates. One was on the right, one was in the middle, another one was on the left. I don't care, because what you elect to council, if it's a mayor or a councillor, is judgment. Because the issues we start every term with are never the issues that we're really involved in the end, because new issues come. And the best example was going through COVID. Who would have thought that our lives would change for 3 years? So you're electing people's judgment. This right, left-wing sort of conflict all the time. And I always remember my late friend Tom Gosnell, who sort of mentored me, who was the mayor of London. And Tom was very, very conservative. But what we loved was we would come together on issues like trying to save Via Rail, trying to do other things for the region. That's all that mattered to us. And I didn't even know half the politics of a lot of the people. You could guess, other mayors. It didn't matter. We come together and we try to find a solution to whatever the issue of the day is. So we need to get that back, and it's going to be a long haul to do that. And when I go back to those councillors, people I was trying to get to run for council that were very solid, would have been good candidates, had good judgment, they all walked on me at the end. They said, I don't want to join the circus. And I think that's one thing you've got to watch. There's a lot of people now saying, I don't want to go to that. Why would I do that? And I'll give you an example. Look at Mark Garneau, the astronaut, the first Canadian to walk in space. He got into politics, and all it does, the second you open that door, they come after you and your reputation goes down. And so good people say, and I know they've tried to recruit Chris, and he's Cadfield. Chris has been so smart, he's not entering that. He knows he could get elected. He knows he could be in a leadership position. He just doesn't want to go through that. And that's what we're doing. We're driving good people of very solid views and beliefs away from this. And so what you're getting, in some cases, is a lower tier of candidates representing it, who are all, they don't like it. But I will talk about City Hall sometimes. I try to get across to them. The world doesn't stop when we meet. All people care about in the community is that we're going to do things that aren't going to hurt their lives. And 80% of the stuff we do as a council, as a mayor, will happen no matter who's there. They're just things you need to deal with, whatever it is. It's that extraordinary things. And right now we've got all sorts of planning initiatives underway. We've got a new waterfront plan, which is moving forward this year at Ferry Dock Hill. A new master plan coming on Cantor Park, which is just starting, we're looking for public input. We just adopted an active transportation plan with bike lanes and all these other things that will improve the community in the years ahead as we do projects. We're building a new road, there will be a bike lane. Some people don't like that. There'll be walking space. Some people don't like that. And I was pleased, I didn't know about Mr. Noel passing away, Alan, but he was key in keeping that Howard Watson nature trail. And look what it is to the community today. And they fought it was the politicians that didn't want it. And they fought very hard to achieve that. And the late Howard Watson, who I knew from being principal of St. Clair, he was a quiet man, but very determined. We're not giving this up. And he changed public opinion, so that's why we have it today. And I always got a kick out of the fact that how public opinion changes. At the time, there was and I wasn't directly involved because it was a former township in Clearwater, and we inherited it. But all the people along the trail, most of the people along the trail wanted that property for themselves. They wanted that extra 50 feet or 100 feet or whatever it was. Well, they didn't get it. So what happens when you see a real estate ad now in that area, Twin Lakes and all along there, right by the nature trail. It's become a really important part of why people move there and are active in the community. So, again, I'm being very general today, and then there's lots of issues to talk about, from the homeless to addictions and housing in the community, and I'll take that through your questions. But really, I guess each one of you can be a sort of disciple to say, we want to get back to where we were. Not being totally nostalgic, because politics back then could be brutal too, but it wasn't as personal as it is today, where people, there's a really right-wing guy out in Alberta who seems to be the puppet meister of the premier. And in the last few weeks, believe it or not, I'm defending Mr. Poilievre here. He suggested Mr. Poilievre was having multiple affairs with women. He attacked the former mayor of Calgary, Neshi, for his physical appearance. And even Smith walked away in the last few days that she doesn't endorse these type of views. We need more people saying that. These are views we cannot tolerate, in the sense of they're personal and they're not doing anything to improve your community or your country. So with that, I'm pleased to take questions. Whoever wants to go first. Dick?
So the city has a website about Have Your Say, and microphone too?
If people please come to the podium and ask a question.
Is that better?
Yeah.
So the city has a web presence now that when you go about whatever you're going to do in the community, have your say, go on, put in your opinion. Could you just tell us a little bit of how that process works after somebody goes on and says, for example, I go on and say, I like bike lanes and yes, you should go ahead with it. How does that fit into the process of making decisions at City Hall?
That's a really good question right now, because I've been having this discussion with the CAO and the clerk and some of the senior staff in the last few weeks. There's a couple reports. The council agenda is out for the next meeting, which is a week Monday. And there were we did a review of the rules of order, which changes a whole bunch of things of how we operate. There's a couple of other issues there. We asked for public input. We got zero public input on these issues, which is concerning, because I don't want to get into the complexity, but what's happened is the media has shrunk so badly in communities, you cannot use them to get these issues out there. It used to be 10 years ago, there'd be something in the Observer, there'd be a bunch of stories. Now the Observer, in my view, has now just become the Sarnia Police Service press release paper. And, I understand they had 20 reporters. George Masson was telling me 20 years ago. They got 3, which means there's only 2 working at any one time. So I understand their limited resources. So you can't engage the public the way they used to be. And the other thing which you've seen what's going on in the States and here, there's now a disconnect about how people are getting their information. Is it just, if I want to watch the news on Channel 10 out of London anymore, apparently there's no news on weekends. I get cash cap because they've cut that service. Bell Media just made those cuts. And as the media has shrunk, you can, if you really know the media, you can see the decline. So the Sarnia Speaks is there. It's a tool. I do get concerned it's used over and over again because it never seems to go on beyond a certain number of people. And I don't know how to get that other engagement on other issues. Or you could say, if you took what some politicians do, well, everything must be okay if they don't have anything to say. It may be they just don't feel it's warranted. So I'm glad you're doing that. But that information comes to us as part of what it said. I think there's a lot of suspicion, about special interest groups and individuals who just keep coming back on. But you got to filter that. You fill that with anything you do, right? So I'm, again, actively trying to find how are other ways that we can engage people and get a true sampling of what they think. And a good, I can give you a good example of the bike lanes issue. So there's 1 or 2 on council that are just anti-bike lanes, right? And they're not looking, in my view, at the bigger picture. And there's our groups out there that are very strong and supportive of that concept. And I agree with that because we're not building a bike lane for this year. We're building for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And there'll be a day where, things will change dramatically about people's active transportation. So all that is listened to, but the fact that people are pulling back from engaging with us it's happening everywhere. They just don't think it matters. And I don't know how to restore it. I'm trying to, but I'm just trying to figure out how do we get that back into. Like personally, everyone knows they can email me, call me 7 days a week and all that. And I hear from people a lot. And if I could just sort of digress a little bit here, I also don't like what I'm hearing in a lot of cases. And I go back to this after COVID. What I'm hearing in a lot of cases directed towards the addicted, the homeless, It's not empathy. It's get them out of those parks. It's their fault. They're junkies or they're this and that and everything else. And it's not the way Canadians would operate in the past. And I take the position, so you would like us to go into Rainbow Park, where no one is being impacted negatively by them being in the park. There's a bunch of tents there. And what, arrest them for the crime of being poor? That's what's happening. There's an anger towards, and I think it's because now, in the community, every community in Canada, it used to be the homeless and the disadvantaged were, maybe categorized and not in your eyesight. Now they are. When I was out earlier this morning, there's a woman sleeping on a bench by the new coffee place by Lola's there, right? Not hurting anyone. And there's a team the county sends out with mental health, police, et cetera, when there's someone reported that way. It's happening all the time. And I was speaking to a school group the other day saying, you think about this. There are people walking these streets right now with their whole life in that shopping cart. And people mock them. But that's their life. And so, the fact in Canada that we can't get to the point where everyone has shelter that wants it. I will say one of my, if I have to say, achievements last year was getting County Council to unanimously agree that homeless and shelter, because they're two separate issues, housing and shelter would be our number one priority. And I'm pleased to say this coming Wednesday, we're moving and moving and moving, trying to create more housing in the community through the county. And that city's offered land down on Victoria Street, which we've ran into some opposition on. We've also tried to get this other group in Indewell to do certain projects in the community. And they've got a history of doing projects successfully geared to people that need them. And so, again, it's trying to overcome that anger of everyone, and everyone always says the same thing. Well, I'm not opposed to housing for the homeless. I'm not opposed to affordable housing. However, and we went through that, and then I'm digressing, but I think it's important, is we approved a project on Murphy Road where the Greek church is a couple of years ago, against tremendous opposition in the neighborhood, and I think I can tell you why. It was the first project of this nature that actually went across the Berlin Wall there, called the 402. So we supported this project in a different part of the city. Unfortunately, because of interest rates, and it was a great project, and it's still semi-alive. I just talked to the MP from London, the Liberal one, see if he could help us with CMHC. It was guaranteed 20 years low-income rent housing for women over 65. Women who are, on old age security, and that's probably it. So we're hoping we can get that going. But you're constantly running into, and again, we won this one, but we've got to get the project moving. So again, the times are different. And I was telling some people the other day from Alberta that came to visit me, was that, these days I get accused all the time of having a hidden agenda, a second agenda, right? And my standard response is this: I can hardly do the first one. Why do you think I would have the time and energy to do two? And so there's a suspicion out there on a lot of the things that are going on. And I can tell you from experience, a lot of the times it's simply what it is. A tree is a tree. But people will build in now. And, the internet has certainly fed conspiracy theories everywhere. And, we went through this with COVID, where it didn't matter what you said, 20% would be automatically questioning whether that was real or not. So I appreciate the question. It's long-winded, but I wanted to get, that we are listening to people. Hey, Chuck?
Yes. This is just out of curiosity, because you have been in politics for such a lengthy period of time. And, we all know that over a long period of time, people's attitudes and opinions change. The most glaring example I can think of is same-sex marriage, where people stand on it today to where they stood on it 30 years ago. Another example might be Justin Trudeau's spending policies today, significantly different from the Liberals under John Chrétien and Paul Martin. And
True.
My question to you, Mayor Mike, is just when you look back at time, is there any public statement or position that you might have regretted, but it seemed
I can just tell you that I do listen, and I've said this many times to council. When I'm going this way, if you're riding a dead horse, dismount. Get off the horse and recognize this isn't going where you thought it should go. And I think I'm not as enamored with the Premier of the province, who seems to do that all the time. And I'll tell you why I'm not enamored of this. There was a whole story in Globe a couple of weeks ago about all the times he's changed his positions, right? And that's fair. I mean, people should be flexible. However, what the story really pointed out was it's how he made those decisions without any engagement with the public. None. On the Green Belt, a lot of other issues. Now the latest one on judges. It's how you make those decisions, and then you stand by them if you think they're right. But when you retreat, it's because you didn't listen to people prior to making that announcement or decision. And I think that is not the right way to approach public decisions.
Okay, good, good. So this isn't working, right?
It'll go on the computer for the recording.
Okay, so you may have to repeat.
Yeah, I can repeat it. Yeah.
Really, I came.
Well, do you want to come up here and ask the question?
So I'm Don. I came to Sarnia in '76. And it's funny, because of Canatera Park, I said then I would retire here, and like 40 years later, here I am. It was the same population back then as it is now. Is it, like, why? I guess you've been around long enough to have an idea why we haven't grown like a lot of other cities have.
Well, I would disagree with that, and I'll say that in a minute.
Okay.
There's an old joke I can use here is that the reason the population hasn't changed is because every time someone gets pregnant, someone leaves town. Oh. That's why it's equalized over the years. Actually, we're looking at 10 to 15,000 in growth over the next 10, 15 years, and it's happening. That's why we'd be dealing with the housing situation. The international students have certainly brought a lot to the community, and I say that in a very positive way. So housing is an issue, and it's because the population is growing. The other thing that's happened is, this whole thing about we're the best kept secret in Ontario. There's a lot of truth to that. But now in the real estate market and elsewhere, I was at a school, I guess it was Thursday, and the young people that were taking me to the classroom, one had just moved with their family from Timmins, one from Toronto, for a more affordable, safer lifestyle. So I think you'll see in the next round of figures, because again, our estimates from outside experts is it's growing. And you always get the question, who's living in all those big homes? And it's a question I ask too, but it is really happening, so the population is changing. And you know what? What I've learned, especially dealing with the immigration issue and bringing more people and newcomers in, is I can't give you a percentage, but there's a good part of the population is okay with the population where it's at. And I think of places like Milton that just skyrocketed because of their proximity to Toronto. There's a big backlash. And then the other thing that happens is people don't know each other. But now it is changing, and I'm looking forward when we can change those signs. I'll go out there myself and paint it. Good question. Thank you.
It always saddens me when I hear another trucker has died at the end of the 402 here, and it seems to be happening more and more. I don't know how many have died, but I was wondering if you have conversations provincially about what can be done to stop that.
Good question. We don't have control of the highway, obviously. This has been an ongoing issue. Remember when they made it into what it is today with that sort of jet runway, all the lanes there? That didn't solve the issue. And the truckers I've talked to, and again, I want to be careful here because it's a generalization. A lot of them said to me, it's distraction is getting ready to cross the border. So you've driven from London, wherever from, and you're getting ready on the computer. It used to be with paperwork, and they said that often people get distracted. And they come over that hill, and they get past, excuse me, Moldon, and they're not ready. And so repeated efforts have been made to try to do that through the province, through the OPP. And a lot of it is just human error, people making mistakes. And I don't think you can blame it on the way that the highway's set up at this point. And the one place there have been a couple of accidents, which I'm always wary of, is that stretch right by Chris Hadfield Airport. There's been a number of fatalities there, and it appears to be people maneuvering in and out of the traffic with the truckers and not winning the battle. And there's a couple of people killed there this past year. It's a good question. It sounds like I was having this conversation the other day, and actually I think Margaret, who's on here, I think she saw my email this morning. Her response to it on issue was, I honestly believe all of us should have been mandated to take driver education after COVID ended. In Sarnia, AMBER means accelerate. And I don't know how many times you see it. When I go out to Modeland to the research park where I'm all the time, people just run the lights. And so there's a different attitude out of there, and you've probably all seen it in your own lives, right? People not respecting what you used to have general respect for. But it's a tough question because it comes back to human beings and them paying attention. I can't point to the highway being the issue, but a lot of it is, and plus the other thing is, again, I'm not attacking truckers, there's a hell of a lot of new truckers. And those garbage trucks are still going through here, right? Doing 2 runs a day from Brampton. Try doing that. I hate driving the 402 once a week, never mind beyond that. So there's a whole bunch of other factors that come together, driver fatigue and all those other things. And it's not totally solvable by technology, but we are certainly aware of it. Anyone else? You got to come up here.
Well, I've been waiting to see if the tiny housing is going to go through. Apparently it may go through in May or June. We'll see. If so, I'm ready to turn my 220-foot garage into a tiny home. It'd be nice if there was a little funding to help me, but apparently we'll all need lots of parking for this. I know in Toronto, you don't have to have parking for your house. I'm not sure why that would be a big issue here, because a lot of people in that tiny house might just have an e-bike or a bike or something. And I wonder how many here who have their homes would be willing to do that, to provide some housing if it is approved. And just issues about housing. I actually agree with the park that have the people in the tents if they like, and help people out there. Just, make sure that they're behaving and not going into the local houses or something, a good relationship there. But just all kinds of things like that. The places that have little houses that you can, with a coat on it, and you can stay there for the night if you need it. There's just so many exciting ideas, I think, for housing.
Well, excellent point. That's going to be a really big issue in the next few months, because we're looking to change the rules, and we need to get people to accept that the world has changed. And one of the things that's happened since I was last here in August, the Premier gave 50 mayors these superpowers, strong mayor powers, right? Which means I can lift this podium up and move it over there like this. I've been joking about it. And I agreed to their goal, which is another 1,000 units by 2031, and we can meet that. We just got headlines across the country. For the first year, we've exceeded our goal by 350% because of a combination of things, not just, this has been going on, these different projects and stuff. So it's a big issue, but what people are going to really have to get their minds around, it's an issue in Windsor. They refused the federal housing money because they weren't going to allow fourplexes into neighborhoods, fourplexes. Meanwhile, a threeplex legally can go into any neighborhood now. So they've loosened the rules, and I've got issues with a few councillors that can't, going back to your really good point about the parking. Wellington Flats over by Vision, the new place that's been built, and it's geared to people that need housing. Their number of parking spots is a very small relationship, because we used to demand, you had to 1.5 parking for every person in an apartment. That's not the way the world is. Many of those people don't have automobiles, nor do they want them. And there is a project. I just talked to Dave Waters from Habitat last Saturday night. We're doing the coldest night of the year march. They've got a plan for 4 or 5 tiny homes, actually right across from Rainbow Park. It'll be coming to us for zoning in the next, I think, month or two, he told me. So these are all steps to show people. And I'll just give you, I've been at the new owners of Skits about that back land there, where the football fields are. There's a tremendous opportunity there. And to the county, Look at the old Divine Street School site, which is vacant. There's opportunities there. And we need much more than I've said that we're getting in housing in the months ahead. We need much more. And I always use the example of after the Second World War, I'm told, that all the veterans coming back were basically guaranteed. They try to get them jobs, and that's why they're in post offices and liquor stores, but also housing. And if you look at the tree streets, we call it, that was all housing after for veterans, and it stood the test of time. And if you look at Sherwood Village and Cardiff in the 70s, they were developed with grants to help people get their first home. And I know my parents were one of them. My dad never wanted to own a home, but for some reason my mother talked him into it when they were 50. And it was a great thing because then they could move up, as you paid off your house, you went to another one. And we need more of that. And I hate the phrase because the Ford government uses it all the time, all hands on deck. And one of the issues we run into, for example, we offered the county that land 6 or 8 months ago where the parking lot at Victoria, right? In Victoria parking lot, the one by Tangs, right beside it, we've offered that up. And other cities are now following example, Hamilton and London, to offer up municipal parking lots. You got the land, you can act very quickly and get housing up, right? And I go by 7 days a week, by the Victoria lot. And I will say to you, if it ever exceeds 50% on a good day of parking, and it's free, I'm stunned. And it went from being the most underutilized parking lot in downtown Sarnia, and if you listen to some of the people around there, it is now the most beloved parking lot in downtown Sarnia. And our plan is this, working with the county, is to keep parking for Tangs and some of the other places there. And then you get all these people just oppose the idea of concentrating a group of people who don't have the highest income level in the same spot. But I look at the Hoskin development, I look at some of the other developments, but what I'm seeing everywhere, that NIMBY thing's kicking in. They just come up with different reasons. Oh, there's not enough parking. Well, if you're a property owner, you're going to figure out either I have enough parking for the building or I don't. And who's my marketplace? So we're going to be looking at changing those rules, and you will see there'll be resistance from some on council. But the reality is the world's changed. And then, I'm sure many of you have been to Europe, where you go through a neighborhood. There might be an apartment building and there might be a single family home. There's a real mixture of uses. And I do think you have to protect, commercial intrusion into residential areas. But residential intrusion into residential areas? What's wrong with that? And it's coming. It's too slow. But it's going to happen if the council has the determination to move forward and endorse these projects so they happen. And that is always my biggest fear. Tiny homes are coming. This Indewell group, just Google them, their success story. We had that group of Rotarians, Heather Martin and John DeGroot and Michael Coos, that came forward for last year. They've raised an incredible amount of money to move forward housing projects. And one of the things that will stand out, which the county has accepted, is money to get them going. It takes a couple of $100,000, unfortunately, to get CMHC to endorse your project. You got to do this study and this study and this study. These churches, these organizations don't have that. They just don't have it. So that money will be there to get through these studies that CMHC needs, and that's a positive step forward. But we got to get our minds to think differently. The old cookie cutter 1960s, 70s, the little houses all the same, and we're still doing that, unfortunately. That's got to go. We got to start thinking about the mixed uses in neighborhoods, and it will be to the benefit. It'll be to the benefit of those neighborhoods. And I live in a mixed use downtown. That is a great combination of different uses. Anyone else before I say goodbye to you?
Did you get some water?